Welcome to the Federalist Radio Hour. I am Emily Jashinsky, Culture Editor here at the Federalist, joined today by my colleague, Assistant Editor Kylee Zempel. Kylee, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Emily.
Of course. Well, what I thought was the craziest news cycle that has ever existed in the history of the universe got not 5 times crazier, but 10 times crazier on Friday night, as we all know, with the news of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing. This was already an election cycle that included a pandemic, that included a recession, that included historic, widespread racial unrest and violence in our nation's cities and on our streets. And of course, you layer all of that on top of the already existing craziness of the Trump presidency. And you have where we are right now on this day, facing a confirmation battle in election season of Donald Trump's first term. Kylee, as you've had the weekend to digest the news of RBG's passing, what are you thinking? And I mean that in a very broad sense. Really, what are you thinking right now in terms of where we're going between today and November?
So honestly, Emily, my head is spinning with thoughts about the RBG situation. Everything you said, of course, you really didn't think it could get crazier, and we just continue to be surprised by the levels of insanity. So that's just the overarching thought that I have. But beyond that, I mean, this isn't the first confirmation battle we've had during the Trump presidency. I remember
the third.
Thinking during, right, the third. I remember thinking during the Kavanaugh confirmation that if the Trump re-election were to have happened immediately following the Kavanaugh confirmation, that Trump would have won in a landslide. And I remember thinking that as I was watching the protests at the Supreme Court during the Kavanaugh hearings, during all of that confirmation battle. And that was my thought. And then I immediately followed that up in my head with, imagine if this had been RBG, just how much crazier even that confirmation would have been. So now fast forward, and we're actually facing that leading up immediately. You know, we're within 50 days before the election now. So all of those thoughts just come flooding back. And I think what's been weighing most heavily on me about the RBG situation is just that this isn't just replacing a judge during a Trump presidency. This is not just replacing a more leftist judge on the court. This is replacing someone who the left has propped up as sort of a deified figure. She has become someone not even someone who's just politicized, but someone who has become a celebrity. And so, you know, we've already seen the confirmation battle for replacing someone who didn't have this level of fame, I guess, or someone who wasn't propped up as much. And now I can't imagine how it's going to go for someone. I mean, we've had documentaries, dramas come out about RBG. She's known as the notorious RBG. I mean, it's like people are walking around with RBG laptop stickers, dressing up for her as Halloween. I mean, this is no ordinary justice that we're seeking to fill. And then make it during a Trump presidency. And I mean, that's just madness. So that's kind of the framing, I think, for this entire conversation about the nomination.
Well, a quick aside to your point about the lionization, this is anecdotal, but as I was driving down First Street, just beyond the Supreme Court a couple of nights ago, I think this was Saturday night, the road was packed almost like I've never seen it, because usually that's all like blocked off for things like the inauguration and the 4th of July, with cars parked up in the street, and young, like millennial, our age girls dressed as RBG, wearing RBG socks, and some older women as well. Just actually really, it seemed like the whole DC community had converged upon the Supreme Court to, pay their respects to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She really has been lionized, and I do think that's an element now of this replacement battle. But this is the first post-Kavanaugh confirmation that we're going to see in the Supreme Court. And I wonder if you think because conservatives, and I will assume that both you and I are included in this, believe the Kavanaugh confirmation battle was a disgrace, but also something that awakened a lot of average Americans, maybe people who aren't super political and changed to the news cycle, to the excesses of the left that have infiltrated really the Democratic Party and now kind of govern the direction that establishment Democrats take on some of these cultural issues. That's what a lot of conservatives believe. I wonder if you think the left has learned its lesson. Sort of from our perspective, there's a lesson in there that the excesses of cultural leftism and the excesses of media corruption, which I guess is an excess in and of itself, but the concept of media corruption, the execution of media corruption. Do you think that the media and the Democratic Party have learned any lessons from Kavanaugh that will change the way they approach the hearing that we're likely about to embark upon?
Well, you're right that this is the first judicial battle since the Kavanaugh confirmation, but it certainly isn't the latest political battle since the Kavanaugh confirmation. And I guess you can answer your question by asking, did the Democrats and media learn their lesson during impeachment? Did the Democrats and media learn their lesson during coronavirus? Did they learn their lesson during, other political
Clarence
campaigns?
Thomas, yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's like we've had other things that have occurred since the Kavanaugh confirmation where the Democrats and the media just continue to show that they have no limiting principle. They continue to show that they're willing to stretch the truth and smear figures at all costs. It's like, you watched it during impeachment, just the spinning of everything and the lies and the corruption. It's like, you can look, it's not just Supreme Court nominations where the media just continue to demonstrate their malfeasance. I don't think that they've learned their lesson. And I don't see this being a smoother nomination whatsoever. I mean, people are burning cities down because they're unhappy with things. I mean, it's like, where's the due process? Where's the rule of law? Like, I don't know how this would be any better than Kavanaugh.
Yeah, I think you're right, especially to point to impeachment, because in terms of like the tactical maneuvering of establishment Democrats and the people here in Washington, that's a great example of how they have this thirst for the destruction of Donald Trump that really blinds them to the less wise aspects of their political strategy at times. I think we've seen that over the course of this administration. And I think it's kind of why they're in the position that they are right now, where, Donald Trump is campaigning in Minnesota. He's saying he's going to win Minnesota. He's drawing these big crowds in a place like Minnesota, still drawing a big crowd in a purple state like Wisconsin. And I think a lot of that is because of those, like Donald Trump latches on to those excesses of leftism in a very effective way, and, puts them on a silver platter to some of those swing voters and says, hey, here's the Democratic Party. And Joe Biden is struggling right now to get through, sentences. Do you think that he's going to have, moderate Joe is going to have total control over his administration? Now, there's a lot of debate about whether it is a principled decision for Republicans to try and replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg right now under these circumstances. It seems as though the party clearly has decided whether the principled or politically expedient factors or variables, whichever one was weighted heavier for them, and with politicians, we always know the political expedience is weighted the most heavily, but that doesn't mean something isn't principled nonetheless. Whatever drove them to this, it does seem, and I'm curious if you agree, that we will absolutely be seeing an announcement of a nominee this week, and that the vast majority of Senate Republicans will be supportive of beginning the confirmation process.
Well, you're seeing the different factions start to emerge among conservatives. I mean, when the announcement first came out about RBG's passing, and then, we're starting to hear things from the Trump campaign about their plans, I was a little bit torn on what I thought was the principled decision, and also just what I thought was the most politically expedient. I wasn't convinced immediately that nominating someone would be the best move for Trump, although I'm beginning to agree with that. But you're seeing even among the Senate Republicans that there's all kinds of ideas. You've got Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins really splitting hairs over this and coming down on different sides of it. I do think it's the principled decision because of the duty of the executive and the legislature, and because the GOP controls both the executive and the legislature. So this is, of course, different from, say, the Merrick Garland situation or other things that people have been trying to draw parallels to, but are, of course, not the same. You're kind of comparing apples and oranges there. I just hope that the GOP can maintain a united front and not fracture over, ideas about Trump too much, that this turns into, we don't need to divide ourselves over this. The Democrats will try to do that for us. And so the GOP just needs to decide what's the right move and then go with it. And I think they really just need to be united.
Well, and make no mistake, there were Republicans during the Merrick Garland dust-up that certainly let political expediency override their principle if the situation were exactly the same and the parties were flipped. Of course, they're politicians, come on. But that, again, doesn't negate the possibility that there is a real principled argument for doing what was done in that case and doing what is going to be done in this case, because as you've noted, these are not two equivalent situations because Republicans in this case hold the Senate. Mm-hmm. And this is my segue into something that is scaring the living daylights out of me, which is we are staring down the barrel of an election week, right? This is not, because of the pandemic, going to be a typical election night where the returns come in. We have a pretty good indication of where things are going to go within, the next 6 hours. And we're sitting around watching cable news, watching the returns come in, watching the talking heads spin and, analyze this state, this county. That's not really what we're going to be seeing this year. It's going to be something totally different. And we could be looking at a Bush v. Gore situation where the Supreme Court needs to get involved in evaluating the election results, and without your full bench. Which, who knows if even the confirmation process gets started if you do have a full bench. But the reason we fill these vacancies is because we rely on the court to make decisions, and sometimes we rely on the court to make emergency decisions and urgent decisions. And we could be looking at one of those cases. My larger point, though, is just that the principle of when a party is in control of the Senate and the presidency, we want to fill a vacancy because it's the Supreme Court's job to make these decisions. And so it should be operating at full capacity. How, in your opinion, you've spent so much time in Wisconsin, all of your time really in Wisconsin since the lockdown began. I'm wondering, as someone who's been outside of DC, do you think people are really fully prepared and have really wrapped their heads around what we could be looking at on election night? And, how does the Supreme Court battle factor into that?
Yeah, so I've talked to voters a lot about this on the ground in Kenosha, at Trump rallies, at Pence rallies. So I've kind of gotten, I think, a pretty good picture of where Trump voters are at going into the election. And it's funny because when you ask how they're feeling about Trump, I would say the overwhelming majority of conservatives in Wisconsin are convinced that Trump has the support he needs to win the election. I can't tell you the number of people I've heard that have said he's going to win in a landslide, or I have no doubt, and you look at the volume of his rallies versus the just lack of enthusiasm for Biden in the state. And, I can see why they feel that way. I don't want to make a call about it for sure, but you can see why people are convinced that Trump has a good shot, if not are convinced he's going to win. But immediately following up that sentiment is, I think he's going to win in a landslide, but I don't trust the election. I don't trust the results. And most people will point to mail-in voting or things for that. And usually I follow that up with asking about whether they think we'll have results right away. And everyone thinks we won't have results right away. Trump voters are very skeptical that this is going to be a smooth election. And so I think it's a very real possibility for a number of reasons, but mail-in voting in the pandemic certainly has a part of that. And you're right that that's a reason why we really need not to have vacancies on the court. We just are on such a limited timeline here, and we've talked about how this is going to go. All the different ways that Democrats and the media will try to stop this from happening. Even if Trump comes forward with his nominee and the Senate starts its confirmation process, I mean, short of having that vacancy filled by election night, where does that leave us? I just don't really know, because I guess I'm not convinced that even though we have had confirmations within a 50-day period before, I'm not convinced that this will be one of those cases. And so I guess I'm not optimistic that we will have a full bench by election night.
Yeah, let's talk about something you just said. We have done this before in short order, correct? There are actually there's a good handful of examples where justices have been confirmed in a shorter time frame than we have between right now and election day, right?
Right.
Yeah. And
there's a handful.
Right. There's a handful. There is a historic precedent for this. Now, this could get really ugly. We've already talked about Kavanaugh, but I really think this is probably the most important lens to view this confirmation through, because Kavanaugh changed so many things. The way that there was a gang rape accusation, that he had some sort of membership in a rape gang, in legacy media publications. This pick, do you agree? Let's just start with this. Do you agree this pick is likely to be a woman, if not certain to be a woman?
I would say likely. Close to certainty, if not certain. The names at the top of the list are women, and I think that's an obvious political move would be to choose a woman to fill RBG's seat.
It's a political move, and it's also, I think, a principled move. And I remember I wrote this back when I was at the Washington Examiner, when Kavanaugh his name was being thrown around, and I can't even remember the other names, other than, of course, Amy Coney Barrett was being discussed at the time. But I think it's so important, especially for conservatives who are fighting this battle in the essential differences between sexes, to realize that in politics and on the Supreme Court, where they look at political cases and cases that involve sex and cases that involve whatever else, that women do bring a different perspective to the table. And so I think replacing a woman with a woman is a really smart move, and especially a woman with her experiences that involve being a mother to all of these children, and a woman of faith. Do you agree that it's important to include women on the court? Because I got a lot of pushback at the time. People basically saying this is basically affirmative action. This is just trying to throw a woman on the court, and this is like just total virtue signaling. And I was like, well, no. Like, wait a second. We believe in sex differences. And so we should believe that those are important in this context. But just tell me if I'm being a squish.
No, I absolutely agree with you, that I think it's a very principled decision, particularly because you only have such a limited number on the bench. You right. Really need to have a woman's voice in there. And I think for conservatives, it's a principled move, but also it just cuts against so many of the left's arguments about, here you have, 9 old white men deciding the future of women's healthcare, or, yada, yada. I mean, how many times have we heard that line? And so I think it's a great move to have a woman on the court. And you're right. We do recognize that there are differences between the sexes. And so there's plenty of issues that have reached the Supreme Court that a woman's perspective is very important. So I agree. I do wonder what they're going to sling at the nominee, assuming that it's Amy Coney Barrett. The Catholic issue could be the one. Although, I mean, the gang rape allegations against Kavanaugh was such a ridiculous accusation, and just so out there and like so slimy. I mean, being
Poorly
a Catholic
sourced.
just does, yes, being a Catholic just doesn't carry quite the same degree of, people finding that abhorrent. So, I just wonder what the media and the Democrats will come up with to sling at a female conservative nominee.
Well, first we have to start with whether she drinks beer, whether she still likes beer. So this was going to be my next question, and the next topic. I think it's absolutely important to be thinking about right now at this moment. And I guarantee you, both parties are combing through the records of Amy Coney Barrett, as well as some of the other women and men, perhaps, whose names have been mentioned, but particularly ACB, Amy Coney Barrett. And by the way, the law of nature is that you have to replace a woman with 3 names with another woman with 3 names. And so I think that also helps ACB, as she shall be known from here on out. They're combing through her record right now. Do you think, Kylee, that she is a gang rapist?
I don't think so.
But you don't know.
I can't say for sure. But
right, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So trust but verify. I guess we'll have to undergo that process right now. But it's seriously, and the gang rape accusation is like funny now because it seems so ridiculous. But what that did to Brett Kavanaugh's life and what that did to our politics is absolutely not funny. It's terrifying. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering what you think because you just asked, like, what could they possibly have on Amy Coney Barrett? What do you think we're going to see? I mean, do you think they're going to attempt to dredge up these things? Do you think they're combing through her personal life and all of her decisions right now? But, decisions aside, do you think that we will see some sort of dredged up personal allegation against Amy Coney Barrett, or do you think it's likely that Democrats are going to have to find another strategy, perhaps because they're worried about offending Kavanaugh, the people who were so turned off by their conduct during the Kavanaugh confirmation, and because there just nothing really exists?
Well, yeah, so I don't think that they're going to find anything of substance when they comb through. I would imagine that they will try to just smear her with all of the same things that we see the left trying to smear conservatives with. They'll construe things that she said as white supremacist, or, they'll no doubt use her Catholic faith against her. It will obviously come down to the abortion issue, although, that's just a difference of morals, not anything that she's done that's so egregious. So I think that's what it will come down to. I do wonder, though, you talked about this earlier and then you just brought it up again, the way that people saw the conduct against Kavanaugh. And I think it's interesting because we as conservatives and, we've spent a significant of time in middle America. We know what that sentiment is, but do you think Democrats and the media did learn their lesson? I mean, did they see how awful that was? Like, do they see their conduct as egregious, or have they just echo chambered enough that, they just don't even know how conservatives and the public perceive this? I mean,
yeah, that's a great question. And I think the media is the key to this, because if the media depicts something like their conduct during the Kavanaugh hearing as excessive and dangerous and a big turnoff, then that's when Democrats start to say, wow, maybe we've crossed the line. And that didn't happen. So I do think there are probably some wiser, likely older establishment Democrats who saw what happened with Kavanaugh, and they won't be so quick to jump on stories like Ronan Farrow's in the New Yorker, like they all were in the past. And it wasn't just the Farrow story. There were other stories that were just sort of like coming out of the woodwork that were ridiculous and thinly sourced, that we saw leaders in the Democratic Party sort of latch on to very quickly. And I think there are probably some wiser older people in the media that will be more careful, maybe a little bit more careful, not a lot more careful.
Don't give the media too much credit, Emily.
Oh, they get no credit, absolutely no credit. I think, out of self-interest, they might, take a breath that that lasts like for a millisecond when some of these things are in consideration. And by the way, I'm only talking about that subset of like, seasoned reporters and Democratic politicians and strategists who saw what happened and realized, hey, the RNC is out here talking about how this was great for them. Maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe we should think about it a little more closely or a little more deeply. But, the problem right now for Democrats is that they have the media echo chamber and the social media echo chamber that totally distorts what the public is thinking, and they haven't really grappled with that. They still don't, they're still having a hard time taking the pulse of the people outside of the Acela corridor. And also, this is sort of a function of that and a function of other things. They are totally under the sway of the far left. Right. And they have a really, really hard time controlling some of those further left members of the party and, of the like broader left coalition, right. They people on Twitter that, can be held up as basically representatives of leftist thought at any given moment of time. And so they have a really hard time controlling those elements. And conservative media is here to hold them accountable for it. We do not have the power of the corporate media and these legacy establishments. But, that actually, people who watch, the legacy media, the corporate media, cable news, whatever it is, they can make up their minds for themselves and say, this is ridiculous. And I think with Amy Coney Barrett, we're going to see, this would be also my next question for you, is what the narrative is likely to be surrounding Amy Coney Barrett, or really any woman that is nominated. And it's going to be that they're a religious extremist, anti-woman, anti-choice, abolish Roe v. Wade type of person. Do you agree with that prediction about the narrative that's likely to emerge?
I do, not only because of who the media and the Democrats have proved themselves to be, but also what else do you go with? I mean, that has to be their line, that she's a right-wing conservative Christian extremist. Roe is the obvious line that they will have to go with, but it's just crazy to see someone who is so accomplished in her career. I mean, this woman wears so many hats and has done so many things, has this huge family, has adopted children. I mean, accomplished law career. And so it'll be interesting to hear the left smear someone like that as anti-woman, because it's just so absurd.
Well, and I'm actually particularly, there is one thing that Republicans should realize going into this, is that like most women and voters are like, they don't want to eliminate Roe v. Wade. So when Democrats run with that, it's not entirely going to be ineffective. But I am really curious to see how the Democratic attack machine, the optics of that, when you have someone like Amy Coney Barrett, who we've seen, in this process with Dianne Feinstein, like we've seen her in this situation before, someone who's very likable. I'm really curious to see how that works on, a likable woman versus, no offense to Brett Kavanaugh, a kind of vanilla, just a dude, right? Like,
right.
And no, I really mean that without any offense, of course, to Brett Kavanaugh, who was very, he was admirable how he handled himself throughout the confirmation process. But on a woman like Amy Coney Barrett, I'm just very interested to see what that dynamic would look like.
Another interesting dynamic that I'm looking forward to seeing is the Democratic ticket. So during the Kavanaugh hearings, you had Kamala Harris being one of the most awful people to Brett Kavanaugh, really smeared him and just went very hard after him. And so, you have her campaigning now, she's on the ticket. And you also have the dynamic in this ticket where you now have a female running mate and a so-called Catholic presidential nominee. And so, although they won't be the ones, they're not going to be the ones making the decision, but to see how they handle it on social media, to see how they deal with the left and the media's attacks on, say it's Amy Coney Barrett, people attacking her Catholic faith, attacking her for being a woman, to see how Kamala Harris and Joe Biden handle those optics, because there's some crossover there.
Right. And again, unlike the Gorsuch confirmation or the Kavanaugh confirmation or most confirmations, this nomination is going to take place less than 50 days before the election. We're likely to see the hearings start before the election. And this is an election, again, unlike any other we've ever seen, where we're looking at this long election week, where we're in a pandemic, where the economy, it's doing all kinds of weird things, but we've experienced recession. This is a strange election, and now we are layering a post-Kavanaugh Supreme Court battle on top of it. Kamala Harris, we should all remember, sits on the Judiciary Committee. So the vice presidential nominee might be in a strange situation where she is questioning Amy Coney Barrett. Kamala Harris has already, Catholics have already, national sort of like publications have already, I believe including ours, highlighted Kamala Harris's record when it comes to handling Catholics who cross her path and Catholic issues. And the Catholic community thinks it's pretty anti-Catholic. And so you possibly have the vice presidential nominee questioning someone like Amy Coney Barrett in this situation. Now that both parties have to approach this confirmation battle as the primary political theater heading into this very strange election, I don't know how you disentangle the web of different variables, right? Because there's so many different things to think about that impact each other in different ways, right?
Right. How do you think, is there any precedent? I guess I just don't really know of a vice presidential nominee in this situation. I mean, has there been anything like this before?
Kylee, I'm not a historian.
I wish I knew. I really need to do some research on that, because I mean, and what is the political play there? Like, do you kind of recuse yourself from that? It's not really her style to sit things out. So,
except for the Iowa caucuses.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, nailed it. But yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And the other question heading into this process, I really have to wonder how they're going to, if you are the Democratic Party and you have to question a female, likely conservative jurist in this setting, and let's say you're Donald Trump, right? Like, Donald Trump is the master of optics, and you give him credit for anything, it's that. I mean, he understands the public relations aspect of campaigns. He understands the importance of optics, and he understands how to execute optics in a way that few people who have ever been involved in the political system in modern history have, at a level that people just don't understand. So, or that other people haven't been able to emulate. How do you think that impacts this pick? And do you think Amy Coney Barrett would meet his criteria? Do you think that she would be someone who goes against his criteria? What do you think about that?
Well, it depends. So, the other potential pick would be Barbara Lagoa, I believe is her name, which could definitely benefit Trump politically. So particularly in Florida. So it'll be interesting to see whether Trump goes for that aspect of the good optics, or whether he goes for the pick that would maybe rally up his pro-life conservative base, right. For the same reason that he chose Mike Pence. There's a lot of similarities between Amy Coney Barrett, or ACB, and Mike Pence. So I don't know that there's necessarily, there's pros and cons to each, but they both could be good for optics. I'm going to call ACB. I think that would probably be the most likely pick at this point. And there's so many reasons why that works for Trump.
Is it because he has a target and important demographic of suburban women, is that the primary political advantage of going with ACB?
I think, suburban women, but also just, I mean, so much of his base is evangelical Christians, people who are very pro-life. I mean, how many people voted for Trump because of the judges issue and because they want to see Roe v. Wade overturned and because they care so much about the abortion issue? I mean, she checks all of those boxes in a big way, and maybe Lagoa does too. But I think there's just a really big appeal. And yeah, probably mostly among suburban women, but among a lot of Trump's base generally.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point about Lagoa and how, from the perspective of the politics of all this, she could be helpful in Florida. And it puts Democrats in a situation where they are not only questioning a woman and attacking a woman, but a Hispanic woman. And that's another tricky position for them to be in. But I also think, Trump may be kind of irked by some of what Gorsuch has done in his brief stint so far on the court. And there's a real likelihood, in my opinion, that the White House right now is taking into serious consideration. Like, if you remember what the Gorsuch confirmation battle was like, we can get this guy confirmed and we can maybe pick off some Democrats. That's why we're putting him up there. And, he's on the list. But, that may not be enough this time around. They may be really scrutinizing this potential nominees' records to ensure that they will have someone who who rules like a conservative jurist on the level that they're looking for. And I don't know how that impacts, the decision between ACB and Barbara Lagoa and maybe some other candidates. But I do find it very interesting that Joe Biden has said he's not going to put out a list. He hasn't put out a list so far. And that's something that was really successful for Donald Trump. And now Biden is looking at, he's looking at this Ruth Bader Ginsburg having passed away. We started this conversation with you noting the lionization of RBG on the left. You used the word deification of RBG on the left. Now, there's a RBG shaped hole on the Supreme Court as far as the left is concerned. And I wonder why Biden isn't putting out a list to ensure and affirm his commitment to replacing her with someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or somebody who would satisfy the fans of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who are, really mourning right now.
But it does kind of make sense when you look at all of the factions in the Democratic Party that Joe Biden is trying to appease. I mean, if you're Joe Biden, who has been all over the spectrum, sometimes trying to appear moderate, sometimes trying to appeal to the far left faction of his base, trying to pick a woman of color as his VP and somebody who's to the left of him, and trying to hold on to this idea that he's Catholic, but then also standing for all of these cultural issues that are completely against core tenets of the Catholic faith. I mean, who do you put forward in a list of potential judicial nominees when this is the field that you're trying to play the entire thing?
I mean, there's only one option, and it is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
It's the clear answer.
The list would be the squad. It would be AOC and Ilhan Omar, and maybe he would throw like Chrissy Teigen in there.
And I think they do a great job.
Yeah. Really? Chrissy Teigen? I don't think she would do a good
maybe
job.
Not. Maybe not.
I think she's a little too moody. I wouldn't trust her temperament.
Yeah, but she'd be great for the gram.
It's funny that I actually just pulled that name out of my hat. I'm not wearing a hat, but my metaphoric hat. And Chrissy Teigen has a show on Quibi called Chrissy's Court, where she plays a judge, sort of like Judge Judy. So,
wow.
It's actually not that far-fetched.
Wow. I thought you were going to say it's really not that good, which I imagine it's not.
It's not. No,
okay.
It's not. No, it's not. It's not good at all.
But in all seriousness, you bring up the squad. I mean, that is one of the factions that he's trying to appease. So how do you present a list of judicial picks that doesn't alienate all of the suburban women that you're trying to win over to vote for you in 2020, and that also doesn't tick off AOC, who's going to take it to Twitter and, you know, blow it up. So I think it's not smart of Biden in some ways to keep this list hidden, but it also makes sense why he hasn't released one, because who do you put on it, you know?
I mean, obviously, Chrissy Teigen. Well, there's so much to talk about when it comes to this decision. And, you know, we've really only scratched the surface, but I hope we've done so in a helpful way, because as this unfolds, I think we are likely to see something on the level of the Kavanaugh confirmation, in terms of a process that is just absolutely mind-numbingly frustrating to people who want to see Washington and the media function at a level that benefits the public. And I think we're unlikely to see a process that resembles that in the next few weeks and the next few months. Kylee, do you have any final thoughts?
No, just watch out for the media. If the trends continue, I don't see this being any better than Kavanaugh. And in fact, I see that it's probably going to be much, much worse. And so in some ways, I hope that the Democrats aren't as crazy, because that was very unbearable to go through that. But in another respect, I hope that, you know, this is really just an opportunity right before the election for them to show their true colors, and that, you know, after the nomination and during the confirmation, we can have the same feeling that we did during the eventual Kavanaugh confirmation, where it became very clear who the Democrats were, what they wanted for America. And I think that if that happens again, we could be looking at a very different race in 2020 within 50 days. So.
Yeah, and you know, another thing that we didn't even talk about is whether the Republican instinct and decision to go pedal to the metal on this confirmation process will be a political advantage or disadvantage, or neither for them. My guess is that it's probably neither. Voters probably have no strong opinion on whether this is, you know, in line with the constitutional duty or not. But that's just another example of how this situation is a tangled web of variables, and it's very difficult to know what is going to happen in the coming weeks and months. But we will be here to break it all down on the Federalist Radio Hour, on the Federalist, and on the Federalist YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to on YouTube, and we highly recommend you do that. We put up the Daily Federalist Radio Hour podcasts on the channel, but also reaction coverage, right, you know, as it's happening to breaking news and to some of the major issues that come up every single day. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel, but we will have coverage of all of this and more on the Federalist Radio Hour. You can email the show at radio@thefederalist.com. I'm Emily Jashinsky. She's Kylee Zempel. We will be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.